Welcome back to another episode of Metal Mastermind. Today we're going to be talking about writing metal bass lines for your metal songs. Well, this could really apply to any genre of music, but we're going to give you some really valuable tips on how to come up with better bass lines for your songs. Now, before we get started, I want to clarify who this video is for. If you're already an experienced bass player, whether you play metal or any style of music, I really want you to hang around for this video because we actually want to hear your opinion and get your expertise as a bass player in the comments of this YouTube video. You may have some things to add to this that would help our viewers and so forth. So we encourage that. Now, this video is going to tremendously help you if you're just starting out playing metal on bass or just starting out with bass in general, because these concepts we're going to go over here really apply across all genres. And it's also really going to help you guitar players out there who like to play bass. You play your guitar, you record your tracks, write your songs, but you also want to write and record your own bass tracks. So this is really going to help you as well. So I'm going to break down 3 methods for writing bass parts, for writing bass lines, okay? Now, the first 2 methods, and we're going to hear some examples by the way, the first 2 methods are going to be the most common of the 3, okay? So method number 1, what's method number 1? Method number 1 is playing the same thing the guitar is playing. Okay? And I spelled guitar wrong. There's an I there. Hopefully you can read that. Okay? Playing the same thing that the guitar is playing. This is method number 1. So what we did here, we wrote just a short piece of music to give as an example for all 3 methods that we're going to go over. So I want you to hear this. This is just kind of a typical metal riff here, kind of a stock metal riff, if you will. It's in the key of E minor, and really the only chords we're playing here are the E, the D, and the C. Okay, so let's listen to this track real quick, and this is the bass guitar playing the exact same thing that the guitar is doing. Now guys, this is probably the most common method of laying bass tracks or writing bass lines, especially for you guitar players that want to play your own bass tracks. A lot of us guitar players, and I used to be guilty of this as well, we just had this thing that like, okay, well, I've got to play the exact same thing on bass that I did on guitar. That's the way it's supposed to be. Not necessarily. Now, this doesn't mean what you just heard doesn't mean that it was wrong. You could pull that off and you could make that work, but there's a better way. And actually that's going to be method number 3. We got to go through 1 and 2 first, so hang around. So again, this isn't the wrong way to do it, but there's a better way. And you're probably going to mimic what the guitar is doing for a lot of the song, but rarely will it be the entire song, okay? So just understand that. There is a better way of doing that. But again, number 1, same as guitar, bass playing the same thing the guitar just played. That's probably one of the more common methods. Now, let's talk about method number 2. And again, this is a really common method here as well for bass players, for beginner bass players, and also for guitar players who play bass. So method number 2 is just playing the notes, okay? And you'll hear the example here. All right, just playing the notes. All right, so here's an example of method number 2. We're just really not even following what the guitar is doing every step of the way, but we're just playing those notes of the chords that the guitar is playing. So let's listen to this. This method, again, is very common for beginner bass players, just kind of starting out playing metal or just playing bass in general, and also is common for guitar players who want to lay their own bass tracks. And what usually happens here is if the guitar is doing something kind of complex or it just has a lot of movement to it, which again I know this is pretty much a kind of a standard metal riff, but there was some movement, there was some choppy stuff in there with that palm muting of that E power chord. Well, instead of following that like we did in method number 1, we just played the note. In other words, we just played that E note on the bass while the guitar is doing that little choppy piece, okay? And then of course the rest of the riff was kind of like just going to those chords. So again, we followed that. But yeah, this is a very common method. Now again, this method is not wrong. It can work. Either one of these methods here can work. Actually, if you kind of switch these methods up a little bit, when we're playing the same thing as the guitar was doing in method 1, we actually came down to playing the notes in method 2 when we went to the D and the C, if you notice that. So again, very common methods of writing bass lines to fit metal music. But there is a third and what I consider a better way of writing your bass lines. Number 3. Okay, I'm going to call these dynamic bass lines. And Lord, my handwriting is really messy here. Dynamic bass lines, okay? And before we even talk about this, I'm going to let you hear method number 3. So let's listen to this short clip. So as you heard, we have got a lot of movement. Now we're gonna break this down further, okay? Because we're kind of all over the place, and not that we're really doing anything super complex on bass. We're really not. I'm gonna show you an easy way to kind of mimic what you just heard on bass guitar. But we're moving those bass notes around, okay? We're not just playing the same thing that the guitar is playing. In some parts we are. You don't want to totally eliminate this, right? You do this sometimes. And we're not just playing the notes either, right? We're moving around, which again, this is okay sometimes as well. These first 2 common methods, you don't have to just do number 3, right, and eliminate this. Really, dynamic bass lines, writing dynamic bass lines is really a combination of these 2, but then adding some more variables into the music. So here's what we do. First thing we do is we have to assess the key that this song is written in, or this part rather, okay? We have to assess the key and also the chord notes being played in that key. So in this case, and I know we went over what we're about to go through here, we kind of went over this in the last video when we're talking about how to turn your metal riff into a complete song. I'll put it up there if you guys want to go catch that. I'll also leave a link to that video in the description as well, so you can watch this first, then go back to that. But we have to assess the key that we're in. So we are in the key of E minor. Let me do like a little E minor Metallica thing there. That looks pretty cool. All right, actually, I kind of screwed up there. All right, so we're in the key of E minor. That's the first thing we need to assess. So what we want to do is now we want to assess what are the bass notes, or what are the notes in general, okay? Notes. What are the notes in E minor? Okay, this is important. So let's go through this real quick. I'm just going to write the notes up here. Let me erase this and kind of write the notes bigger here. The notes, and I'm not going to say E minor because on bass you don't have minors, majors, you just have the notes, which kind of simplifies things a little bit. So let's go over the notes in E minor. Notes are E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, and D. So these are the notes in the key of E minor. Now, what's interesting here about this riff, and again, very simple riff here, is we know the riff is in the key of E minor, so we've got that E power chord in there. We also know that we're playing a C and a D. Okay, we're not really doing much of anything else here. So here's the thing though. with knowing these notes in the key of E minor, we know that we can use any of these notes in the key of E minor. So here's what I want you to start thinking about. Even though we're just playing an E and a C and a D on guitar, you can try to fit some of these other notes in there, okay? So what we did here, what we started out doing is, of course, the guitar is just playing that E. We've got that choppy little thing going on there, that palm muting, real cool stock metal riff there, right? But instead of just hanging on that E, and instead of just doing what the guitar was doing, we actually did a little bass run with that using F sharp and G. So listen to this little part one more time. This is a really awesome method to use, just playing what's called like a little bass run to use, especially when the song has the guitar just hanging on that chord, whether it's moving around or whether it's just kind of, holding out the power chord, whatever it may be. You can add little runs in by adding some of the notes that are already in that key and just making something work. Now, this E, F sharp, G, and back to F sharp, whatever, you can kind of go back and forth. That may or may not work all the time, but the goal here is to get your mind thinking about other possibilities, other things you can do on bass to kind of fill in the gaps, right? To kind of keep the song moving and again, just give it what? Give it more dynamics. Now, in that same riff, we also utilize a C and D before the guitar even got to going to that D. We hang on that E minor a little bit, then we go to a D. So I want to play that part for you. You'll actually hear the E, F sharp, and G, but then you'll hear it after that. I'll extend this little clip here so you'll hear the C and D, a little run that we do. So listen to this. So while the guitar is playing on that E power chord, we fit in so many things to kind of fill in the gaps. Now, another thing you have to think about is you have to make sure when you're playing these extra notes, and you don't have to play all these notes, you could cut some of these out if you want or whatever. I just wanted to give you an example. But as you're playing these notes, even though you're playing different notes than what the guitar's actually playing, you still have to make sure that it makes sense. You have to make sure that it fits musically, and more importantly, your timing. You have to make sure your timing, in other words, if you're playing the C and D here, well, you don't want the timing of playing those notes to be completely off from what the guitar is doing. And this is where you really start having to train your ears to hear what sounds good versus what doesn't, okay? If you're playing something, if you're trying to fit in more notes, but it's just not jiving, it's just not sounding good, then just recognize that for what it is, be honest about it. It's like, okay, well, we don't do that, or we try something different. So just a little side note in there. So now, another thing that we do that's very interesting that I really want you to start thinking about is sometimes you may go to a note on guitar, or a chord on guitar, but you may play a different note that coincides really well with that note. Okay, so I want to play this short clip here. Listen to what the guitar's doing. The guitar's actually going to a D right here, but listen to what I'm doing on the bass. I didn't go to a D, right? I went to an F sharp, and actually I did that little F sharp G thing again. So here's the thing, F sharp and D, these coincide really well together when you're in the key of E minor. And of course, I could go on to several other keys and share those as well, but it's all about finding other notes that may sound just a little bit better when you play this chord here. Yeah, I could play a D on the bass, and actually I do the second time around when we go to the D and the C, or the C and the D. But for this particular part, I'm on that D for a long time, right? When we go to E minor, the E power chord to the D, we're hanging on that for a little while. So I say, well, let me try F sharp right there. And that just, oh man, it sounds cool. And the F sharp kind of gives it that heavier feel, heavier vibe while you're up here playing the D on guitar. So it just meshes together really, really well. And of course, when I'm playing bass, I don't like to hang on notes too long without adding just a little run. So we use that F sharp, G, F sharp, we use that going back to the E, that little trick, I don't want to call it a trick, but that little run that we create there. And again, what that does, it adds dynamics. That's what you want in your music instead of just playing what the guitar is playing, or just playing the notes, right, of the chords to match the chords, you're adding dynamics to the song. Now, there's one more thing I want to point out about the bass line, this dynamic bass line, method number 3 that we're talking about here. If you listen to the very end, I'm going to play it real quick for you, you notice we go from the E power chord to a C and then a D. So I want you to listen to this clip, acknowledge what the guitars are doing, but also recognize what the bass guitar is doing here as well. So here we've got a C and a D, right? We're playing the C on guitar, then we're playing a D, okay? And that's really the end of the riff. Now, what we do on bass is instead of just playing the C and D, and again, we could play the chords on bass. That's not a bad thing, but I wanted to share this example with you by creating a run, okay? Like a little bass riff here, just to give it, again, more dynamics. I know I keep repeating that, but I want you guys to get this. I want you guys to understand that dynamics will more than often always make your song sound better, okay? It's just going to give it that push, that power. And let me just say something about bass lines real quick. A lot of famous songs, and I know we're talking about metal music here, but a lot of just famous songs in multiple genres are known for their bass lines. Think about that. So what we did, we went to the C on bass, right? We went to the C, but then I did this little run. So I went to a C, then I went to that A. A is here. It's in our progression. We can use it, or we can at least try it and see if it works. This is all about trying different things to see what works for you, okay, or what works for the song. We do this A, then I go back down here, and instead of going straight to the D, I move up to the E, right, to the E on the A string there, and I do this little run utilizing those notes, right? I'm utilizing the C, the A, the D, and the E, when the guitar is just playing a C and a D. So we're just doing that little riff there on bass, which again gives the song more dynamics. And it kind of leads us right into that next part, which we kind of repeated the riff, but that would be a cool thing to do. Like maybe you do that on the last riff of that. Let's say this is a verse, for example. Let's say this was a verse of the song. Maybe you don't do this the first time around, but the second time around, maybe you throw in that run there to kind of gear the listener up for what's next. Hey, something's about to change, because this little run happened. Something's about to change. We're going into the chorus or a different part of the song. So that's just something else to think about when you're writing your bass parts. Maybe the guitar does the same thing all the way through, but maybe the second or third or final time around, you do a little run to carry the listener through that journey to the next part of the story that you're trying to tell with your song, okay? So again, this is just some cool concepts you can follow when you're writing your bass parts, okay? What were our methods again? Our method number 1 was the bass really just doing the same thing the guitar is doing. It's not wrong, but there's a better way. Method number 2, really common method as well. That was following the chords that the guitar is playing and just playing those notes on bass. Again, not wrong, but there's a better way. Method number 3 we talked about is adding dynamic bass lines, and that's where you're just kind of putting more stuff into the music to give it more life, more dynamics, and that just kind of helps drive the song. Now, real quick, make sure you download our free songwriting guide. This is the freebie that I was talking about in the beginning. We have a free songwriting guide called our 10 Secrets to Writing Original Metal Songs. So grab a copy of that. There's a link in the description of this video. Now, many of you have this guide already. If you have the guide and you're not in our songwriting course, make sure you get into that. There's a link for that in the description as well. So guys, I want to thank you so much for being here and going through these tutorials with us. I have a lot of fun doing these. I hope you enjoy them. And again, I hope you get a lot out of this. I hope this helps you. That's our goal, to help as many metal musicians as we possibly can here at Metal Mastermind. So thank you for the support once again. We'll see you on the next video.